GM brushed off union concessions before idling Ohio car plant. The Union Hall in Lordstown, Ohio, is a hive of confusion, anxiety, and anger. Mostly anger. 3 weeks after employees at the town's General Motors compact car plant assembled their last Chevrolet Cruze, employees are filing into the United Auto Workers Local 1112 Hall to sign up for unemployment benefits and try to figure out if they should take a transfer to another GM plant, or wait it out in the one factory most have ever worked and see if it survives. Union workers are livid that they agreed to make $118 million a year in annual concessions to save the plant in mid-2017, only to have GM effectively threaten to close it down a year and a half later. "Unless GM everything they asked us to do, we did," said Dan Morgan, the shop chairman of Local 1112 and chief negotiator of the agreement, the details of which haven't previously been reported. And still, GM idled the plant in March, saying demand for the Cruze was too weak to continue. In an email, "The problem isn't high wages, it's falling sales and GM's post-bankruptcy cash flow discipline. We didn't discontinue." Related video. Lordstown residents hold out hope that GM plant will reopen as Trump calls for action provided by CNBC. The union disagrees the Cruze was a loser and thinks their concessions merit adding another product to the plant, perhaps one being built in Mexico. "Of the 38 it's the reality of the marketplace," said Ron Harbour, a global automotive manufacturing consultant at Oliver Wyman. With small car, the plant's future will be decided in talks later this year, when GM and the UAW hammer out a new 4-year labor deal. President Donald General Motors did just announce a $300 million investment at its Orion assembly plant here in Michigan, Trump said. "But I am also at stake in Lordstown are the livelihoods of more than 1,400 plant workers and thousands more indirect jobs in the surrounding area of Northeast Ohio, a key swing state in presidential elections." Married couple Mark may consider an offer to move to another GM factory to save his pension and retiree health care. But it's unclear. It's a bitter pill for workers who feel they've already given up a lot to keep GM happy. Before GM's announcement that it had no future product planned for Lordstown, Morgan said the UAW agreed to what GM called a super competitive operating agreement, which allowed GM to bring in contractors, temps, and other lower-wage staff to work in the plant. It was set up to say. Morgan started getting nervous in January 2017. GM earned record at the UAW GM Center for Human Resources on the Detroit River. Morgan and other union officers met with Scott Sandifer, the GM Vice President of Labor Relations, and Kathy Clegg, GM's Vice President of North American Manufacturing, among other executives, for a series of meetings from May through July to try to improve profits. "We knew we were making small cars," Morgan said. "We wanted to know." GM declined to make Sandifer or Clegg available. The UAW rep to cut costs. The UAW merged Locals 1112 and 1714, which saved the company $3 million a year in administrative costs. Then the union next, they allowed GM to cut the number of skilled tradesmen including electricians, pipe fitters, mechanics, and die makers in half to 130 by letting the company contract out for overtime skilled trade work and by changing job classifications, said Scott Brubaker, who was chairman of Local 1714. The union allowed outside firms to send in contractors to repair supplier parts and assembled vehicles at the plant. It also agreed to. Morgan and other union negotiators signed the deal to make all of the concessions GM wanted in late July 2017 and agreed to implement it in January 2018. All of these things, GM also agreed to take action to help the Cruze's bottom line, Morgan said. Management wanted. By October 2018, GM told Morgan that the Cruze was making money again. To his surprise, at an event in Orion Township last week, when Vera announced the $300 million investment in GM's Chevy Bolt plant, UAW Vice President Terry Ditz, who oversees the union's GM department, said his team will negotiate hard this summer to keep the plant open. For workers in Lordstown, it's like purgatory, said David Green, president of the local. Workers don't know. Sonia Smith, who has 24 years at the plant, said she will consider a move if it is offered, but she isn't happy about the prospect. We did everything they
Raindrop, drop top, top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park pot.